Thank you for joining us and welcome to the AutoGuide Show. We have a lot to cover this week. We have all the debuts from the New York Auto Show, a couple other debuts that happened after the Auto Show. Kyle sits down with Ford to talk Ranger, and we have some big changes to the podcast going forward. But first, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. Your elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a driveway entirely its own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. Welcome back. Okay, so before we get started, it's important to note this week I have been here the whole week, but Kyle has actually been at the auto show, so he will have a lot more to tell us about it. But he also brought home a gift. He got sick. What a surprise.
Yay! You know what? I really brought it on myself. All right. I forgot that the camera does that. So anyone who's watching the video, you just saw a thumbs up appear over my face for some reason. Yeah, so as Mike was saying, I was at the New York International Auto Show for the week, which was a pretty busy one, I would say, in terms of debuts. They weren't huge debuts, all of them, but there was a lot of ground to cover. So yeah, we'll get into it.
All right, so we'll start with some of the bigger sellers. So Hyundai dropped two new, I guess you'd call them heavy refreshes as opposed to all new vehicles. So first there's the Tucson that still looks a lot the same on the outside, but you said there's a lot different on the inside?
Yes, so the Tucson, we saw this change in Europe a few months ago, the visual facelift. Their model is a little shorter than ours, so we get an extended wheelbase. But yeah, it doesn't change much because, I don't know, I think the Tucson is still one of the most recognizable models in its class, and I think it looks pretty good, so that's great. But inside, they have changed parts that we've criticized in the past for being a little too focused on touch-sensitive controls and not actual physical ones. So yeah, there's more physical buttons and controls inside, and of course a tech upgrade. So there's bigger screens, they're higher resolution, and it is running the new CCNC infotainment system, which is quicker and in the best way possible, simpler. It's easier, I find, so far when I've used it, it's easier to navigate and move around. So far, so good.
Yeah, I'm always for more buttons. I pretty much say that in any review, regardless if the car has them or not. Correct me if I'm wrong, is the grille revised? It looks like the running lights are a little more uniform in size, like they don't kind of shrink up or shrink down, however you want to say it.
Yeah, the basic motif is the same, but yeah, all the elements are changed a little bit. So this, like you said, yeah, it's just a little bit more of a unified, a little more upmarket, if that makes sense. It just feels a little classier while still looking very much like a Tucson.
Yeah, no, I prefer the look. And speaking of a new look, oh yeah, sorry. Speaking of a new look, yeah. The Kia K4, it's not just a new look, it's a whole new car. So we talked about this briefly before that it was coming. It is the Forte replacement. It's their new compact car, but with more family resemblance, I guess you could say. And it's funny, I was writing about the Toyota Crown I drove last week, and it's kind of got that fake fastback look that seems to be really in fashion right now. I know part of it's aero, but it's really what everyone's doing.
Yes. Yeah. In person, it is surprising to see it and know that it's got a regular trunk. It stretches on, that roofline stretches on for so far. Thankfully, one of the nice design elements with the K4 that I got to see in person is that it still has a pretty sizable quarter window behind the back doors. So you still, I didn't get a chance to sit in it, our contributor did, but my guess is that means there's a pretty decent view when you're looking behind your shoulder, because otherwise that blind spot would be monstrous.
Yeah, Lee Bailey was there with Kia for us covering this, and if you can't see, even if you're watching the video right now. But if you go and read his article, he was one of the few who got inside because they had that car locked. So there are photos of the interior. I don't know how much it's based on the old Forte. It's obviously a different platform in the sense they've changed it, but it could have just been an updated. They're going on Pontiac and really pressing the fact that this is the widest car in the segment to give you more interior space. It's a direct quote out of their press release, something along those lines. And it's got the same engines the Forte had. So you got the regular 2-liter and then the 1.6 turbo. It appears there'll be no more manual, which is sad, but
Confirmed.
That's sort of the way things go. Yeah.
No more manual. At least in our market, of course, right? Like I'm sure Europe will get it.
Maybe not. They're losing it too.
Although something, I know you just switched to the next slide, but something I want to add about the K4, our colleagues at the Drive did confirm that the hatchback model will be coming to the US. I'm not sure about Canada, but it will be coming. And it looks like a tiny wagon, really. Like it's a hatchback, but it's a small wagon. And that's fun.
I'm going to say that to be more hatchbacky than the sedan already looks, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Next is something we were expecting, but not in this way. When I interviewed Genesis a couple weeks ago, I asked them if they would ever get a BMW M Mercedes AMG competitor, and they kind of darted around the question like they're always paying attention. And then you were at an event Monday night where they announced they are doing that, but it's an interesting name.
Yes, there were a lot of Dr. Evil, references throughout the night because, yes, Genesis is debuting Magma as its high-performance program. It was very specific to use that term, program, because technically it's revising history and including both the GV80 Coupe concept from last year, which you saw debut at the Genesis house at New York, and then also the Vision X Grand Berlinetta that debuted in Gran Turismo a few months ago. Those are retroactively included in the Magma program because they were orange. And so moving forward, there will be more models. There's no reason to think that it couldn't apply to everything currently in Genesis lineup. So far, all we know are two models, the GV60 Magma, which will be the first model to land on our shores. We don't have any numbers, no performance figures, but it's safe to assume, just like it shares its CGMP platform with Kia EV6 and Ioniq 5, probably will have at least some features in common with the EV6 GT or Ioniq 5N, both of which we've driven. And then there's the G80 Magma Special, which sounds really cool. And both you and I are hugely in favor of a fun, high-performance V6 sedan. Sadly, it's Middle East only.
Yeah. I assume it's probably going to get that turbocharged, electronic supercharged combo that they have in the G90 and coming in the Coupe. We'll see when they bring it out.
Yeah, it sounds, I heard a little bit of it talking with people at the show, other Genesis folk. It sounds like it's going to be more or less a bespoke program, sort of like what they do with One of One, which is also a Middle East program for Genesis. And there will be different levels of tune that people can choose for this G80. And if I remember correctly, someone did say that the top one can be over 500 horsepower. So I'm not sure if it will use that e-supercharger or if it's just
way more than it makes now.
Yeah.
Maybe they're going to bring back the V8. Maybe they're going to turbo the 3.8. I don't know. We'll see. Speaking of bespoke, just go off topic kind of for a sec, but in Canada, they have the GRX, which is the Genesis retail experience. And I'm actually going to be doing that with my family very soon because we are partnering up with Genesis to go on a charity road rally this summer to benefit Camp Sunshine, which is a fantastic charity for the kids. More on that down the road. But that's not overly bespoke. You have to pick what they have. But it is kind of cool where you show up and they show you all the different options and you can touch and feel things and make your car. So I could see this being the next level of that, which is unfortunate. I mean, it's kind of more of a end line if you keep with the Hyundai or like the AMGs and M's where it's like M Sport, but it's not an actual M. But it could also just be the gateway. Like they can't go. They need to build up their customer to that point. So
yeah.
Staying with Korean cars, here's another one, and it is the Santa Cruz, which, surprise, surprise, has a similar new face as the Tucson. I would arguably say it's more truck-like. It doesn't look as roundy concept car. It looks more like a pickup, and it gets basically the same interior upgrades, right?
Yes, it does. So it gets a squarer look to its grille, which in person reminds me a lot more of the new Santa Fe. So Hyundai is just keeping its more off-roady oriented vehicles a little more related looking. Inside, yeah, interior pretty much the same as the Tucson. So I'm happy there, just like you. More physical controls. Surprised that there's still not a hybrid option though.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, and it's not like Hyundai doesn't have all-wheel drive hybrids they could put in it, but
Exactly.
just like right from the Santa Fe. It's interesting because the Santa Cruz I've always thought looked almost too concept car-ish for a pickup, and I think a lot of people agreed. Like it looked like a toy, whereas the Maverick, which is similar size, almost looked too truckish. It's just like a little truck. So I think this is kind of a good in between. It's kind of like the Ridgeline. I think it's going to develop more of a niche following of people who, just have maybe things they need to put in the back and carry or tow like a dirt bike or a personal watercraft or something. And yeah, they do some gardening. Who knows? Hey, look, another Korean car. So while you were learning about the magma flowing at Genesis, they also dropped this concept, which is quite intriguing.
Yes, it was at Genesis House. It was 5 vehicles in total. So this was saved for the last one, and it was behind a wall that slowly slid out. And yeah, the Neolun, which is both Latin and Greek for new moon, because we were under a full moon that day. It's a huge EV SUV flagship. It's giving definite Maybach vibes when we saw it in person, but it shows the diversity really and the elasticity of Genesis design language, because this is a huge monolith of a vehicle, and it still has all of their design cues in a way that I think works really well. And this is just the concept, right? Like this isn't even the eventual production model, which we assume will be GV90. We're not sure if it will take all of this, but it will take a surprising amount, because Genesis is very, very insistent that those huge coach opening doors will make production at some point.
Yeah, GV90 just makes sense. Like when they went to 80, which was sort of what you'd call a midsize, they're still big, but an X5 GLE competitor, they've succeeded. I mean, they're only playing currently sort of in the lower to mid trims of those vehicles because they don't have a big, powerful, 500 horsepower version. But this, like you said, it would probably be a lot like the G90, where it's going to be very Maybach-ish, but for the price, probably less than like even a GLS Mercedes starts at. But you'll get more stuff. And back to what we're talking about with Magma, here's another reason that a 500 horsepower engine should exist. From if they make one for the Magma, they could put it in the GV80 Coupe and the G80 in the Middle East, and then it could just be the engine for this, because you need something probably more than the 3.3 turbo in this. Even with the electronic supercharger, I think just people want to feel a little more special in something, especially if you have these coach doors opening.
True. And I mean, like, I know that this concept is an EV, but we've also heard that recently that Genesis might be walking back that approach of full electrification and might start introducing some hybrids down the road. And so a hybrid is a great way to add power and efficiency and smoothness if you're looking at an ICE. So that could be a nice, I don't want to use the term compromise for a huge luxury flagship, but yeah, compromise kind of works. And there's so many details I could go into with this. I had the really fortunate opportunity to get a walk around with the designer, Sang-Yup Lee, and he walked us through the interior, which of course is stunning and uses a lot of really impressive flourishes of color. So there's a purpley indigo leather. There's cashmere all along the door. The ambient lighting it's tiny little dots that are placed in the quilting of the leather, so that it's more subtle. It's not like Mercedes, right, which just blasts you with this this LED ambient lighting. Yeah. So this is a lot more subtle, and it's a fantastic interior. And I assume, based on Genesis' willingness to use color in their production cars, that a lot of that feel, if not necessarily the swivel chairs and everything, could make production.
And it's the one thing Genesis does as well, if not better than anyone. It's making a platform that can take electric or gas. I mean, GV70 electrified, G80 electrified. All right, well, we've got to move on because we're running out of time, but this one's quick. Hey, a 4Runner's coming.
Hey!
Probably what? I think it's probably the third oldest car on the market that hasn't had a serious overhaul. I think only the Outlander Sport and GTR outdated, if I'm correct.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, yeah, so it's coming, and we'll see it soon. That's all we can really say about that. But I know that this picture produced a lot of talk because people are very curious to know if the rear window still rolls down.
Yeah, I mean, that's the 4Runner crowd. For me, I've always said, since the Land Cruiser came back and it was smaller, where does the 4Runner exist? So I'm still seeing this picture under the firm belief it's going to be its own model, but it's going to be heavily Land Cruiser based, but I think very off-road focused. Like this could be Toyota's Bronco Wrangler competitor, like the first thing since the FJ. That's what I'm hoping for. So, give it big wheels, maybe the back quarter roof comes off like 4Runners from way back in the day. Like we'll see. They have the ability to do this with the Land Cruiser. They don't have to make it an everything car like the last couple of 4Runners were. So
exactly, yeah. Having both models means they can attack both ends of this segment now.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to cover a couple other features that were on our site this week, and then we will get into an interview that Kyle took. All right, everyone, let's take a moment to talk about cars. Not the usual cars we talk about on the podcast, but our own personal cars. As a person who loves cars, I have owned many different vehicles over the years, and there's one thing I always can't help but do, and that is modify them. Having the right parts that fit for a car is super important, as you don't want to waste time or money by having the wrong parts. Currently, I have a 2010 Genesis Coupe that was a sort of almost hand-me-down through a family member that I got at a great deal. Having driven it for over 2 years, I'm starting to get that modified bug, and I really want to update some features on the car as well as fix some of its problems. Now, I've always been a sucker for a little bit more noise, so I'm probably going to get an exhaust and intake on the vehicle. I had it on my Alero, on my RX-8, all of my WRXs, and I even tried to get one for my SBX, although I couldn't find the right guaranteed fit part. I'm also needing to replace some of the lighting on the exterior, as a few have lost their seals and are starting to fog up, and others are just kind of looking old and tired. Again, going on eBay and finding the exact part that will fit my vehicle, especially some cooler looking aftermarket ones, is a key factor. After that, I think it's time to look more at some of the mechanics of the car. Maybe some suspension components like a coilover, some strut bars. It definitely needs new bushings, and I also want upgraded brakes. Down the road, putting a limited slip in the car or something along those lines would be fantastic. Again, being able to go on ebaymotors.com and find all of these parts right away that will fit my car is a huge bonus, because then I can cross-shop and cross-examine which part exactly I want without having to then figure out, will this for sure work or will it not? So if you're like me and you like to modify your cars, you should probably check out ebaymotors.com now. Welcome back. So we had so many debuts, and Kyle was in New York looking at all the new cars and other car news. We didn't really get to review much this week, but there was one review that was posted by Kyle, and it's about a vehicle that's almost a hidden secret in plain sight. It's so popular, yet this version is so unassuming, people forget it kind of exists.
It's true. It's a great way to sum it up, Mike. It's almost like you drove the car. It is the RAV4 Prime, specifically the SE, because as we realized when we were booking this, we haven't actually driven a Prime significantly since it first launched way back at the end of 2020. And whenever we have, it's been the higher trim XSE with all the goodies. It's the one that gets all the attention. So this is the relatively affordable model, and I stress relatively because it is still a pretty pricey thing considering you're getting a RAV4. It is 301 horsepower, so or 302, sorry. It's one more than the Camry TRD I drove recently. And in Quebec, and in the one province in Canada, you can get substantial rebates, and so it ends up being much cheaper than getting a regular RAV4 hybrid. And so, understandably, it's in high demand there. But in the US and in most of the rest of Canada, it's a pretty sizable outlay. But like you were saying, it's really good at just doing day-to-day stuff in such an invisible way. You don't notice what it's capable of, and like it worked. It worked in so many easy ways. And I could complain about how the interior is a little dated and it's missing some features at the price range that I would like a wireless charger, but that's about it.
And how you said the 302 horsepower, it's funny because so many people go on and on about the Mazda CX-50 Turbo and the new Dodge Hornet with its powerful plug-in, the Hyundai Kia twins with their plug-in. This thing makes more power than all of them, and it doesn't get the praise for just how much power and how quick it is. Like, it does 0 to 60 surprisingly quick. You can really catch people off guard with it.
Yeah, and that's where the extra price comes in, right? The performance is one side, but also the efficiency. So this has a reasonably sized battery pack. It's about 18 kilowatt hours, but it will do, nearly 50 miles. It's 40 something miles officially, but I picked it up with a full battery, so I figured, hey, I might as well try this now and just stay in EV mode, see how far I can go. And on a day that wasn't even super warm, so it wasn't ideal setting for getting range, I beat the estimate by 15%-ish.
And how much were you hypermiling or just sort of normal driving?
Just normal driving. Admittedly, I live in a city, so I can drive around at lower speeds. But I did use some highway to make sure that I wasn't, juking the stats. So I drove it back down from picking it up on the highway. I drove around the city and drove a little bit more on the highway. It was good. And that extra, there's more power from there's a larger battery pack, but there's also more powerful electric motors. So that means you can accelerate from a stop, from a red light. You can get up to speed pretty easily without having to wake up the ICE. So it's so well resolved, and Toyota's so good at building hybrids at this point. I came away, I don't love the car, but I'm deeply impressed and satisfied with how well resolved it is.
You're saying a lot of the same things I'll be talking about next week with the Toyota Crown Platinum. So I won't get into it, but that's just how Toyota does those. Mm-hmm. So the complete other end of the spectrum, Mercedes showed off a new G-Class, but at this point, we'll just say revised. I mean, what really changes? It just keeps getting, slightly tweaked. And in fairness, you could never change this. Like, the G-Class it's like the Wrangler. It's got a look that it would be pointless to change because that's what it sells on. Showed off that it still will have the V8, which is great. They didn't mention anything about an electric one, which we've been told about before. So that's maybe still coming. But basically, if you want your big, super off-road Mercedes luxury beast that you'll never actually take off-road, it's still here with a nice turbocharged V8.
Yeah, I think they showed the electric one at CES this year because they were doing synchronized donuts on the strip. And so I guess Mercedes is just treating them as two different models, right? And so here, pay attention to this one right now. And then, a few months down the road, they can get that extra media injection and talk more about the electric one.
True. The EQ versus their gas counterparts aren't even like the same vehicle underneath, really, besides the motors. So that could be. And then sticking with the ridiculously expensive SUVs that I can never afford that can off-road, Land Rover split their company into sort of three distinct sub-brands recently. So there's Land Rover and Range Rover, which have always kind of been separate, but they're really pushing Defender out as its own brand. Even though it's only one model, the Defender still does have three not three wheelbase, three lengths is available. And it could be a 2-door, a 4-door, it can be a 5-seater, 7-seater. So even though it's one model, there's tons of choice. Then Defender has announced they're making a new, what they call high performance hero called the Octa. So,
of course.
Yeah, I wrote the article. I can't remember. It has something to do with diamonds, where they got the name from. And it's because it's the hardest naturally occurring substance on Earth. So they have a super far away picture and a couple other camouflage. This isn't an all new model. It is still the Defender we know, but it looks like it's going to have a wide body kit. It's going to be ridiculously luxurious inside. It's going to be more powerful. So basically, it's going to be a direct G63 AMG competitor is the impression I get. They started using BMW engines in Range Rover, and they specifically said this is going to have a twin turbo V8. So obviously their supercharged V8's gone, and they're going to bring in the BMW. And as we know, like that engine can make upwards of 600 horsepower. I don't know what they'll put in here, but I assume it'll be up around there if they are indeed trying to go toe to toe with the G63, which, if you're trying to make it a sub brand, it makes sense. It's sort of like how Jeep unofficially has always kind of had Wrangler on its own and all the different Wranglers. It's going to be pricey and it's going to be cool, but yeah.
Good for them. Land Rover as a whole needs a win, so this sounds like they're leaning into their strengths.
Yeah. Will that mean the supercharged engine is replaced in other V8 models? We'll wait and see, but this is sort of the start. And we'll finally finish it off with a top 10 list I made just because I am somewhat knowledgeable in the world of Subaru. So it's the top 10 Subarus of all time. It is a heavily biased list. So without getting into too many of their rankings and giving away too much, obviously the number one slot is the Impreza 22B STI. I mean, that is the halo car of the brand. They're going for like $600 and something thousand US now in auctions. It's insane. I mean, I used to work for Subaru, so when I got to when I went on a trip to their head office in Japan, I got to actually sit in the prototype 000 it had on the dash out of the 500, 200 they made. So I have all these pictures of me sitting there, and I mean, it is so cool. I mean, it's just a 90s STI, but the wide fenders and all the kit they had inside, and just knowing with a bigger engine, like anyway. Number 2, the SVX. A lot of people will argue that
hugely biased list.
that a absolute failure of a car in the terms of not having enough performance and costing too much money and being really weird shouldn't take number 2, but yeah, as you can see, I like the SVX. So I owned one. I love it. I put it number 2 because I think the XT before it was super quirky too, but this really showed like how Subaru could be quirky, luxurious, and just odd. And I think that kind of led into the next decade of vehicles they made up until sort of the early 2000s, where they had such a fan base, then they kind of went more mainstream. But if you want to see the rest of the list, you have to look at it. Of course, there's some hiccups and some SUVs and some more.
Yeah,
and I was just going to say, I was purposely taking just one trim of every model because I could have made a top 10 list of 22B STI, the S202, the S203. Like it could have been just all STIs because that's obviously the best cars. But I wanted to split it up. So there's one Legacy, there's one BRC, there's a Brad. Yes. So
yeah, and I will just add my little hot take to that and just say the list is great. I agree with most of the picks, but I want to say that it reinforces that Subaru has never made a truly beautiful car. That's all.
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But it's funny because Subaru is the number one brand in my mind that brings out a car. This is basically, I'd say since the 80s with the Leon, they bring out a car where their fan base is up in arms about how horrible it looks and it's so ugly. And then by the end of that car's model run, everyone's in love with it and they hate the next one. Like I remember the 22B style. It looked like a Corolla when it first came out, and people said that about it. But the STIs look so cool, and it got such a fan base through WRC, and people were modifying them. When the Blob Eye came out in 2000 in Japan and 22 here, people were like, "This is hideous," and then they updated it. Sorry, that was the Bug Eye. then they updated the Blob Eye, and people are like, oh, the Bug Eye was better. And then it went to the Hawkeye, and oh, it's just too weird. And then when the I don't even know what you'd call it, but remember the hatch? I had a 2010 WRX, that style. People
and
despised it because they're like, oh, it has framed windows and the Hawkeye. But that's how it always is. Like every new model people hate. And then after like 5 years of people racing them and modifying them and loving them. But I mean, that's what's the same with every car, but Subaru is very particular in this way. And when I worked at Subaru, they used to say there's a reason why the Outback and the Forester always look almost identical. It's because they sell like crazy and their fans want it to look nothing different. So there is a method to the madness. All right, well, we covered a lot of stuff this so far. We are going to hear a word from our sponsor, eBay Motors, and then I won't be back, but Kyle will be back with an interview with Ford about the all-new Ranger.
All right. Hi, everyone. So for today's special guest on the podcast, we're actually on site just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, and we're here doing Ranger and Ranger Raptor stuff. So I'll let our special guest introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Carl Widmann. I'm the Ford Performance Chief Engineer. So I'm responsible for Raptors and high-performance Mustangs. I'm here representing my team. We're going to talk about the Ranger Raptor.
We are. Carl, thanks for taking the time out to listen to a few of our questions. And so I guess I'm just going to have to start. I just got out of Ranger Raptor, and I'd love you to tell listeners, what exactly does that add to the Raptor family? What new things does it bring to the table?
Absolutely. So we kind of refer to the Ranger Raptor as the global Raptor. So it's been in its first generation. It goes to markets the F-150 doesn't do, like South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. So in the second generation, we're super happy to bring it to North America. So it's the first time it's been here. It's like Christmas, right? So the Ranger Raptor still does all the great Raptor things, right? All unique front and rear suspensions, just like every other Raptor, where we widen it out. This one's out 90 millimeters versus the base Ranger. And we actually put a Watts link in the rear, and that gives us tremendous capability for nimbleness in the vehicle. And we still have Fox live valve shocks. They're 2.5 on this vehicle. And they give us all the time we have the shock moving. It's all electrically controlled the same way we do the controllers on the F-150 Raptor and the Bronco Raptor. And in this application, we've increased travel about 1.5 inches front and rear. So we can use that position sensitive damper to isolate you when you're driving on the road normally, or if you're driving up the rocks, it'll be very comfortable as you're oscillating up rock crawling on a trail. And then when you're driving high speed in the desert or on the track, like you're going to do later today, it'll actually give you damping to keep the roll under control. So when you're driving fast, you are in control with the steering and everything's isolated for you. So it's just like any other Raptor, but because of its smaller, nimbler size, it can fit on trails. You can pick your trail. You can bring all your gear along with you and just have the adventure you're looking for.
Yeah, excellent. Like what you just said, we just did the off-road trail, and watching the F-150 leading us, it's like, oh, well, he's kind of setting his path. He's got to take this one way, and we're like, we can play around with it. It's sort of like jazz. Like we have a little more options going down.
Absolutely, and then that's what a lot of people are going to be looking for in this vehicle, right? You can run on the beach if you're out on the East Coast or West Coast. It can run through the woods, a lot more narrower courses that a Can-Am is going to be running on. So it gives you that capability. And if you're just going to put it on a country road, it's set up to steer beautifully. I mean, my first experience driving with the Australia team who did some of the tuning on it was they don't use cones, they use eucalyptus trees. So you're on a dirt track and you really got to tune the steering right so you can put it, kind of lean it on its side a little bit and go around that corner and not hit the tree. So they're super focused on that, and the Watts link in the rear gives us that capability because the lateral stiffness of the tire patch in the rear is much stiffer than a panhard bar system. So that gives you that quick response from front to rear with the shorter wheelbase than an F-150 Raptor and the narrower. It's under 80 inches. And so it just all comes together as we always call it the superpower of Ranger Raptor is it's the nimble one.
Yeah, absolutely. So far, that's what I've got on my first impression. And you mentioned the Watts linkage versus the panhard. So I know that's one of the major differences between these two, the Bronco and the Ranger. So what other changes could people really expect between those two? Because they do have similar engines, what really sets those two apart?
Right. So in the Bronco Raptor, it was set up to be, in essence, an Ultra 4 inspired vehicle. So it runs fast in the desert, and then it can crawl up these huge boulders in Johnson Valley. So it's set up that it can pull its whole weight on one tire slowly and just crawl up these rocks. And then when you look at the Ranger Raptor, though we use the same engine for both of them for different reasons. We need that torque capability with the Bronco Raptor. In the lighter application of the Ranger Raptor, it really gives it a total sporty feel. It's a lot of power. We still put that through a 10-speed transmission, electrically controlled transfer case, locking front and rear axles, so it still has all that flexibility to climb over anything and torque you want. But in that application, we have it with just the general size of the vehicle and that nimbleness. You actually got power when you want it as you're steering, and it just gives it that flexibility that's always egging you on.
Yeah, thanks for. You're summing up exactly what I just experienced on the track. So it's kind of great to just hear it out loud from the engineering side. I have another question talking about, it's been 15 years now, we just heard earlier, for Raptor and in general. So what have you seen really change in the marketplace since original Raptor showed up?
Right, so the original one was all trophy truck inspired, focused on, a halo for F-150 built to Ford Tough. I think it's great that we've got different Raptors that fit to different customers, right? I get a great opportunity to talk to customers, be it the 3.5 F-150 Raptor or the big 5.2 or the Bronco Raptor or the new customers who are waiting for their Ranger Raptor. They'll come to it with the knowledge that it's all that very durable, very capable truck. I think as the evolution from what the Gen 1 is, it's just such a more comfortable vehicle off-road than the Gen 1 F-150. We still have one. We'll take it out once a year to kind of remind people where we're at. So we're just pushing the speeds and capability to really flatter a novice. It's much easier to drive with all the electrical controlled systems and integrated. And you'll see that in the track later when you get out there, from the brake control systems with all the mode selections. It really changes how the brakes are working, the steering's working, the powertrain's working, and that becomes easier for someone that they don't have to hard shift something like on an old Land Cruiser. And so it's easier to more approachable, and the Ranger Raptor does a great job as something that is very approachable. It's not nearly as large and dominating, much more flexible to take to work in a metropolitan area. So I think they're becoming more approachable, but they're actually very, very capable, right? Because you can take them out on any trail. All three of them have run Baja and all completed, right?
Yeah.
So they've got the ability just to, a lot of second users still are pushing them, right? So they live on always, and the first user gets the pleasure of breaking it in.
Excellent. Yeah, it's good to hear and good to see the whole family progressing over the decade and a half. Changing gears a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
My final question to you that our managing editor wanted to ask is that I know you can't talk future performance or future product, and I'm not going to push for that. But as the guy behind both Raptors and high-performance Mustangs, do you see a future for a high-performance street truck?
Yeah. We get that question a lot. I think my response is, right, with social media and everything, Ford keeps the tabs on where the desires are in the market. And then I think if people want a particular Ford performance product or performance derivative, just get out there and scream it from the top of the mountain. And there's people out there listening from Ford.
Well, I mean, if we want to hit up mountains, we've got a whole bunch of them here.
That's right.
Carl, thanks so much for taking the time to listen to our questions. And thanks for making an excellent product. Thanks to the whole team. And that's all I have.
Well, thanks, Kyle, for taking the time to come out here and enjoy the beautiful weather in Utah.
Great. Thanks again.
Cool.
All right, thanks, Kyle. That was pretty interesting. So I know you kind of discussed it, but my number one question, which is always the number one question with the mid-sized truck market, is do you think Ford done enough that this will finally have its own market and it won't be priced on top of heavily incentivized F-150s?
Yes and no. I think that's really a mindset that's hard to change for buyers, right? Like all of us are pretty guilty of that. Oh, but I can get so much more for the same money, like in other aspects of life too, right? So I think for some people, regardless of how hard it is to park an F-150 in a garage or navigate around smaller city streets, if they see that opportunity, they'll do it. But I do think that the new Ranger provides enough capability for most people's needs most of the time, and just looks a little more meant for our market than the last generation one did. I think it will see more success. Personally, I like how it looks too. I think it finds a nice little medium ground between the friendliness of the Maverick and the, like built from solid iron look of the F-150. So yeah, I hope it does better, because I think it does. It's roughly the size of what full-size trucks were in the 90s, and it does pretty much what they used to. So I there's your answer. I hope.
Yeah, the last Ranger was too European for our market. I mean, it was a European vehicle, but there's just parts of it that didn't seem right. And I think Ford's maybe taken some lessons from the Maverick and apply that to the Ranger, but we'll see. Anyway, moving on. As we said at the start, there's some big changes to the podcast going forward. So starting next week, we are going to have 2 new segments. The first one, as people watching the podcast can see, is going to be about F1. We're not going to cover the races and race results and that sort of thing, because we're a weekly podcast and the timing just isn't good. What we're going to focus on is rumors, opinions, news, recapping maybe some interesting things that happened recently. So for instance, we would talk about Alonso's crazy penalty he got in the last race, and there was no precedent for it. And are they trying to set a new precedent, or was it just really that unsafe? We can talk about Sargent having to give up his car because his teammate crashed his car, which seems highly unfair. But when you're Williams and you're fighting for any point you can get, I get it. And I mean, Albon came through for them. Yep. Or how pretty much the only guy we know 100% next year does not have a ride wins a race. So, I mean, talk about putting your stock up. And even Red Bull noticed. And it would be absolutely crazy if we already know Hamilton's going to Ferrari, if Sainz goes to Red Bull, and Verstappen went to Mercedes. That'd just be the craziest switch up. Like next year would be so confusing. But so we'll be talking about that. And we will be having Colin Wood on, who we had on for a previous F1 segment, as he is probably even more into it than I am. So it'll be a little 5-10 minute segment just discussing, topics of the day, basically. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With the parts you need at the prices you want, and with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, they're guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. And that leads us into our next new segment. Hey, look at that beautiful car. We are going to have a segment where we take my 2010 Hyundai Genesis Coupe and kind of half fix it up and half modify it. So this car is, as I described, it's almost 15 years old. It wasn't driven much by its previous owner, which happens to be a family member. It sat for a couple of years during COVID. I bought it. I did a lot of repairs to fix things that happen to cars when they sit for too long, like it was in gear, so I needed a new clutch, the brakes were all seized, things like that. But using the eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit parts, we are going to order a whole bunch of things I always wanted to do to the car, some things that need to be fixed on the car, and then just some other things that, hey, you know what, this would be cool. So next week will have a little segment where I'll walk around the car and really point out what maybe doesn't, but I still want to replace. This is it from last winter. As you can see, it's a all year round car. So anything that's done to it has to still be somewhat livable. So I'm not going to be giving it some crazy slam to the ground stance, which I'd never do anyway. But yeah, I will point out all of its faults. Honestly, though, for a 14-year-old car with the equivalent of probably about 80,000 miles now, or maybe 75, it's in great shape. The body has zero rust. There's damage from people hitting it, but it's rust free. Underneath is rusty. I mean, we live in Toronto. It's Rust City here, but nothing's rotted. So yeah, replace some things, and it'll be a multi-part series over the next several weeks.
I'm looking forward to it. I drove this car once during rush hour, and yeah, it's a really friendly little everyday car. I know that you really enjoyed the 911 Dakar last year, so I just assume that's what you're going to be building towards. You're basically building a Genesis Dakar.
Yeah, I'd love to do that, but that would take a lot. There's just like things with the steering and suspension. Like it's not broken, it's just tired. Like all my bushings are shot. And so just kind of firm some of that up. Like you said, even though it's the original with the 210 horsepower, that was rated on regular gas. If you put premium, it actually is smart enough to give it a little more power. It's so short geared. Like I'm over 3,000 RPM on the freeway in sixth gear. It's still quite peppy for what it is and how old it is. Like I have a GLI right now, which I'll talk about later, but it almost feels as peppy as a GLI. So anyway, we'll look forward to that, or I really look forward to that. Yes. So that brings us to our last segment as what is next. And as I just mentioned, I am driving a GLI this week because I've been around. It's crazy to think that this is potentially the last Volkswagen in North America, if not anywhere, that's going to have a manual transmission. With their push to go EV, and even if they walk it back and do, say, hybrids or plugins, Golf is already discontinued on our shores, and the manual's been dropped other places. GTI, this is its last year. Next year it's gone. Golf R, same thing. Regular Jetta still had a manual available in lower trims. That's gone next year. But I have confirmation the GLI 6-speed will live on past 24. So of all the models, who would have picked GLI as a little sedan is going to keep the spirit alive? And it's still like, it's a great little car. It's just sort of like that RAV4 Prime where people forget there's this little sport compact sedan. Like you always hear about Civic Si and the Elantra. Well, not the N, but the N line. Like it's so spacious. It's got good tech in it because it has the older Volkswagen infotainment system, which I've always loved. The 6-speed's great. You can play with the sound and drive modes. The only thing that it could have, which isn't a huge deal, is it'd be cool if it had the ability to have the rev matching downshifts. I mean, I don't necessarily want them, but I think that technology has gone a long way to keep newer manual drivers in them because it lets them kind of act like a dual clutch because you just put it in gear and revs it up automatically.
Yeah, it's friendlier, especially in a city like Toronto. Yeah.
So I'll be sad to see that go, and I'll have more on it later, but I'm enjoying my time with it. As we mentioned, Kyle, you were in New York, so that's where you spent your week. Next week, we will have a comparison that we are conducting, which should come out shortly after. It is the Civic sedan against again, I'd say heavily revised Elantra sedan.
Yes, more so heavily than the Santa Cruz and the Tucson that we were talking about earlier on the episode, where it got a pretty substantial facelift and then upgrades inside. Yeah, I'm very curious about this one because when these two models debuted, their current generations, the Elantra debuted about 6 months before the current Civic, and it wowed us. It was really good. It was spacious. It was affordable. It was efficient. And then the Civic came out and just kind of moved the compact car game on further. And now we're seeing that happen, but we're at the beginning of it where we're going to be driving the facelifted Elantra, but the 25 facelift Civic is just like 2 or 3 months away.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if it's surpassed the current Civic, and if it has, then obviously we'll have to get the new one and rematch. But and while we're doing that, we have 2 contributors that are off on small events for us. One will be driving a tiny electric car, and another one will be seeing some new SUVs. Well, not new, but refreshed and updated and new generation SUVs. So we'll have more on that in the future weeks. Next week, like I said, we'll have our first F1 segment and our first update on the Genesis Coupe. So that's about it. Thanks for joining again. This has been the AutoGuide Show brought to you by eBay Motors, and I'm Mike, and I'll see you later.
And I'm Kyle, and have a great weekend.
All right, see ya. eBay Motors is here for the ride. Your elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a driveway entirely its own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply.